right, thank you. All right, so welcome everyone to the 57th webinar for the Trees Around the Globe Student Research Campaign. Today, our topic is the State of Trees, May 2023, looking at land cover and river deltas with NASA Delta X mission, including a discussion of global surface water, mangrove science, and trees with wet feet. Today is Tuesday, May 9th, 2023. Our guest speaker is Dr. Marc Simard, and I will introduce, Peter will introduce him in a little bit, but we're going to go through some of the introductory things first, okay, including the agenda. As you can see here, we have a couple, the introduction, and then a little bit about, just want to highlight a couple things for this webinar, and basically the theme that we've been doing for the last couple weeks, couple months for the campaign. Peter Falcon is going to talk to you a little bit about the importance of airborne observations, and he will introduce Dr. Marc Simard a little bit, and we will get into our feature presentation, and then we will remind everyone, if you don't know about it, I should say, is that right now there's a globe challenge going on right now called Where is the Water? A Globe Observer Data Challenge. And then Peder Nelson will continue his talk of riparian environments, and he will be talking to you about the trees with wet feet, global surface water, and mangrove science, with some of the things he's been doing with his research and how it ties into the data challenge, Where is the Water, and looking at edges. So first off, here we have, and I show this every time because we have great numbers coming in. We have especially great numbers coming in for land cover because of that challenge happening right now. But if you go all the way to the bottom here at year five started when we started the on October 1st, 2022, when year 5 started. Since then, we have over 25,000 measurements from over 7,200 global sites. And this is in the tree height measurements, the land cover measurements, and the greenings, green up and green down. So for the life of the campaign, you can see we are almost at 150,000 observations from just over 50,400 global sites. So we have a great amount of participation. And I always add this disclaimer is that we totally understand that not all of these tree height, land cover, and greenings observations that we're documenting here are coming from direct users of, direct members or participants in the Trees Around the Globe Student Research Campaign. These are ones that are coming in from all over the globe, but we include these for the life of the campaign because, as you know, one of the things we do at Globe and at NASA especially is we look at change over time. And this, in 5 years, is kind of like the minimum gold standard to really see these changes happening. And that's why we provide this information to you, because when we have the student researchers who are doing research, in their local environment for their schools, for the community and for the Globe IVSS every year, we want them to be able to see that there is enough data in the database over the last 5 years or the life of the Trees Around the Globe Student Research Campaign that they can work with in just these 3 protocols, okay? Just the tree height, land cover, and well, essentially 4 with the green up and green down. So essentially 4 protocols, but the 3 major areas of tree height, land cover, and greenings. So, and also, feel free to go and check out those blogs as well on our page. We've got around 61 associated blogs with now over 183,000 views. So, we get several thousand views every month on these blogs that we have part of it. And these blogs are ones that are associated directly with the campaign, then also ones that we have written, including myself, for the Globe Observer for the basically the quarterly one I do on trees. All right, so a couple of things I just want to reiterate. Some of the things, what we've been talking about, we've been really talking about a lot about land cover and tree height and edges and where things are on the planet. And these are some really relevant Past Trees campaign webinar. And when I post the recording of this webinar to our webinars page for the campaign, I will include these 4 links as well. So don't worry about putting these down or having to scroll all the way through all the webinar page, because the webinar page is very long because of all the archived ones that we've had, all 57 plus. But these are ones that are really tie into what we're talking about today and what we talked about over the last several months with the campaign. One was lessons from a southern old growth bottomland forest, live from Congreve National Park, with where we had the lead park ranger there talking all about congaree and why this environment's so vital and why the old growth forests are so important. And we had John Moore from the Palmyra Cove Nature Park talk about the New Jersey Pinelands, the nation's first national preservation area, because it sits right along, the ocean and some of the rivers near Philadelphia. And then we had a student presentation with Ana Prieto's students, and this is part of the Juna de los Andes and La Rioja region in the Latin America and Caribbean globe region, talking a lot about tree height, land cover, and the riverside environment. So that riverside ties into the riparian stuff that Peter is talking about today and talked about at last month's webinar as well. And then we have the one with Dr. Lola Fatoyinbo from NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, where she talked a lot about the mangrove system and why mangroves are so important. And this was a webinar that was, one of the best ones that I think we've done, from treetops to coastal waters, where we had folks, we had Lola presenting, then we had two scientists from the Green Heritage Fund in Suriname presenting. And you could see during this webinar, and if you watch this again, you can see how the two research areas, where Lola was doing a research and where they're doing it in Suriname, how they really overlapped. It's really amazing. So this ties in greatly. So before I pass it over to Peter Falcon, is that we have several satellites in space. So we have, over 30 NASA Earth observing satellites in space right now, looking at our planet, looking at everything from clouds to precipitation, to soil moisture, to ice, to snow, to landforms, to oceans, all these things. Since we're talking a lot about riparian things, and Dr. Simard is going to talk about Delta X and looking at river deltas as well. Water cycle and water observing satellites are super important. So I listed some really good ones here, and if you Google these, you can find the websites to these. But I'm just going to run down here. We have the Global Precipitation Measurement Mission. You've all heard about that. You've heard from Dorian Janney often with our campaign webinars. So she's talked a lot about that. Great data there. We have the Gravity Recovery and Climate Experiment Follow-On, or GRACE-FO mission. We have the CloudSat mission, Terra EOS AM1 mission, the Aqua satellite, the Cloud Aerosol LiDAR and Infrared Pathfinder Satellite Observations, or Calypso mission. We have, sorry, I'm partial to the ICESat-2 mission because I've been working on that since the beginning, and I worked, as you may know, on ICESat-1, even though we just called it ICESat. The Ice Cloud and Land Elevation Satellite 2, because that also measures tree heights as well, like we're doing as part of this campaign. And then the Soil Moisture Active Passive Mission, SMAP, which is it's a mission that you may have been part of a previous campaign that I ran for, I think it was a year, the SMAP Soil Moisture Measurement Field Campaign. And this is a joint satellite mission between the Goddard Space Flight Center and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, where Dr. Simard and Peter Falcon are from. And then we have Landsat 9 mission. We have all the awesome Landsat missions, 50 plus years of Landsat. I just put Landsat 9 there because, that's, the most recent numbered one. So, but all of these are absolutely amazing satellites that provide just a wealth of data for helping us understand our water cycle and water and observing our planet's water, whether it be oceans, rivers, lakes, and also the clouds and all the different phases of the water cycle. So, take a look at all of these when you can at some point. And, what I'll do also, I'll put the links to each one of these satellites when I do the links that always fall under the recording on the webinar page. So there's going to be a lot of links this time, under the recording, but that's more information, the better. So let me go and pass it over to Peter Falcon. I will stop sharing right now, Peter, and then after you're done, I'll pop back onto my PowerPoint. So take it away, Peter.
Okay, thanks. Let's see if I can share my screen very quickly. Put multiple Brian Campbell's up there. I'm assuming you can see that okay, Brian?
Yeah, it looks good.
Perfect. Okay, so Brian asked me to say a few words about the importance of having airborne observations, because a lot of people know at NASA, when they think of NASA, they think of course, our astronaut program. But when they think of Earth science in particular, they think of Earth observing satellites. We have quite a few different satellites in space. We have citizen scientists on the ground making measurements as well. We have scientists making measurements on the ground on boats. We have buoys out in the sea. We have weather balloons. But we also have, very important to us, is our airborne science program. So we have a fleet of airplanes. Usually they're a bit older, but we put a lot of instruments on board these airplanes, fly them around our planet, and get a better sense of what's going on with different phenomena of our planet. So you can see here just a snapshot of some of the different images from the Earth Expeditions program that is currently running. So you may ask, what's some of the benefits of having airplanes making measurements opposed to just having a satellite in space? Well, for starters, if we have airplanes, we can use those airplanes to help calibrate and validate the different instruments that we have on board satellites. We can fly them in tandem as well. And we can help to develop new technologies. So rather than build a radar or an instrument, put it on board a satellite and spend a lot of money, you can see I probably add a lot more dollar signs to that line there. Rather than do that, and if we fail, we just spent a lot of taxpayer dollars on board a satellite. What we can do first is we can refine that technology, make sure it's working properly, put it on board an airplane, fly it around multiple places, and make sure that technology is working properly. And then what we can do is we can then propose to NASA headquarters and ask to put it on board a satellite and now get a global perspective of that phenomenon that we're studying. But really, that satellite technology starts with the airborne campaigns first. We can also do process studies, meaning we can obtain high resolution temporal and spatial measurements. And we can do this while we're flying with satellites above as well. Because the airplanes are lower than the satellites, we can get really good resolution of what we're studying. So that's great to see and understand as well. And of course, with NASA, as we do with everything, we want to, of course, pilot that new next generation of scientists and engineers. So we have a lot of programs available to undergraduate and graduate students. So we have internships where these students can then go on board airplanes and make measurements and study what's going on with our planet, just like our scientists, like Marc does. To give you an idea of how many different missions we have roughly about 53 current or recently completed missions. You can see some of them here. I actually tried to put every logo, but I ran out of space and tried to put what each one did, but definitely did not have time to do that. So I can just kind of mention a few of them. Obviously, I should have put Delta X much bigger than the rest of them. But you can see a lot of different missions, what they do. Coral is a very interesting one. It recently finished, but that scientist had a very difficult job. She had to go to all the different coral reefs in the world and study the different coral reefs to see if they're very healthy. So she's gone to places like Hawaii, Australia, I assume Cancun, all these great places with coral reefs. Another one there is Ice Bridge. Brian was talking about ISAT-2 and ISAT-1. Ice Bridge was a gap between the two instruments, so they can also be used to fill gaps in data where other missions are currently either just finished or in the process of being completed. OMG, this scientist has a bit of a sense of humor. He called his OMG, oh my God, Greenland is melting. So it's called Oceans Melting Greenland, but he did it on purpose, OMG. So you can see quite a few different ones, and I will include the link to these different missions so you can kind of get an understanding of the importance of each airborne campaign, how long they last, and usually last about 3 to 5 years. And you can see what they contribute to understanding of our climate and other aspects of our planet. Oops. Let's see. There we go. And as I mentioned, we have a fleet of airplanes. Usually they're a bit older. They're airplanes that have been either decommissioned or former planes that, like the DC-8, used to be jetliners. The ER-2 is a very interesting one. It used to be a spy plane. And you can see a lot of Gulfstreams as well as Global Hawks. We have older military planes as well that we use. So we basically retrofit these airplanes, put instruments on board them, and fly them around different parts of our planet. Here's another little snapshot. You can see the DC-8, which is dubbed the porcupine because it has all these different instruments sticking out of the windows. So where the seats would be, scientists sit there with the racks of computers. And as I mentioned, you can see all the different instruments that are sticking out the sides. You can also see on the right, the Global Hawk. So we also use drones. When it's too dangerous to send scientists on board airplanes, we'll send a Global Hawk. Maybe we want to fly through the eye of a hurricane, we would do that with the Global Hawk rather than airplane. And as I mentioned below there, the ER2, my colleague says we took the spy out and put the science in. So this used to be a high airplane, about 70,000 feet it can fly, which is about suborbital, I believe. The airplane pilots actually have to use pressurized suits, and they actually can fly very high and can study things where other airplanes probably could not. So it's very interesting to see. And here is in 2022, here's the campaign locations. You can see for the most part, they fly around the United States, but they fly other places as well. You can see Greenland, Alaska, and different places. And to the right there are the flight tracks, the different airplanes. You can see they fly all over the place to study, once again, different things about our planet. And as I mentioned, we also have a student-based internship. So we have the START program, the Student Airborne Research Program, and we have the Student Airborne Science Activation Program. And these are internships mostly for United States students, but they're for undergraduate and graduate level students. So they, once again, go out there on these airplanes, make some measurements, understand what's going on with the planet, and get their feet wet, their hands dirty, understanding some science and engineering. So with that, I just wanted to share the different websites. We can go and find out more information about the airborne campaigns. If you're interested, you can go to the website. So we have a Facebook, Twitter, as well as a student page there. So just to give you a flavor of the importance of having airplanes, having these fleet of airplanes studying our planet in place sometimes of satellites or in lieu of satellites. Okay, so with that, Brian, I think I'm done. Just very quickly, just talk about the airplanes. What would you like me to do? Would you want to introduce Mark? Would you like me to introduce Mark?
I'm going to pop back into my slides, and then we'll have an intro slide. You can take it from there. Then Peter, let me go.
Okay.
All right. So we are going. That was a good setup with the with looking at airborne campaigns to what we're gonna what Dr. Simard is going to talk about with Delta X. Here we go. So today he's going to be talking about Delta X, and I'll let you, Peter, introduce him. As you can see, there's lots of stuff there. Dr. Simard does lots of things, and he's very dirty in that picture. So in the marshy area. So go ahead, Peter.
So if I'm not mistaken, Mark, you've been a part of JPL since 1998 as a postdoc. You have been a part of multiple science teams. I know you're part of the SWAT, and then you're the principal investigator, which means the main scientist for the Delta X mission, which you're going to talk about in a few minutes. You also are a member of a project with UCLA. I can see there it's the I forgot, like the Joint Institute something. It's a long prefix there. But you've been a part of JPL. I've known you for many years. I've seen you around. I know your name and your voice. So I'm glad to have you here because it's nice to actually get to work with you. And I as soon as you're done, Mark, I will walk over that model that I promised you and leave that in your office as a thank you for making a presentation to us about the Delta X mission. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to you, and you can hopefully enlighten us about what's going on with these airborne missions.
Great, thank you. So just to share, let me try to share my screen. Is this working?
Looks great.
Yep, looks good.
All right. So thank you very much for the introduction. Yes, indeed, I've been at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory since 1998. I came there as a postdoctoral fellow and never left. So here I am 25 years later, doing some research on global coastal areas using our different spaceborne assets as well as airborne assets. So I would be focusing here on mangroves and salt marshes, and we'll go into the Delta X mission once I get the context a little bit more developed here. Okay, so clearly this is done with a lot of people. Here, I'm just showing some of the co-Is, and there's also a lot of students and postdocs that are involved in all of that research. The Delta X mission itself involves over 25 people, if and not even counting for all the aircraft personnel, so the pilots and mechanics and so on. So there's a lot of people involved. Okay, so mangroves and salt marshes are part of these, what we call the blue carbon ecosystem. So the other one would be seagrasses. And here's the geographical distribution of those blue carbon ecosystems. Mangroves are found approximately between 30 degrees south through 30 degrees north, so along the tropics. And above and below those latitudes, you will find instead salt marshes, which are more herbaceous types of wetlands. And the seagrasses are found pretty much everywhere around the globe, but they're very hard to detect given that they're underwater. So here I'll be focusing on the mangroves and salt marshes. It is extremely important to understand what's going on in these coastal areas. We know that about 40% of world's population live within 100 kilometers of the coast. So a very big proportion of people depend on our coastal resources. And it is important to consider those ecosystems because of everything, all the ecosystem services they provide to us, which I'll be mentioning. So it is projected that 630 million people will live below projected annual flood levels by 2100. So that's a lot of people that may need to be protected or displaced. So let's watch out for that. So a few years ago, we published a map of the mangrove canopy height. Since this webinar is about trees, this is a baseline map representing the height of mangrove forests globally with a 30-meter resolution. So here we just see the entire mangrove coverage, and with heights going from a couple meters all the way to 60 meters, actually. We found that the tallest mangrove forests were found in Gabon, in West Africa, Central Africa. And for those that are, I think there's some Colombians among us here. So the tallest mangrove forest in the Americas is found on the Pacific coast of Colombia. And there's also another paper about that. We actually went to the field. And we find mangroves as tall as 60 meters. So it's very tall. So mangrove forest and marsh, salt marshes are part of the land aquatic ocean continuum. Okay. These systems thrive at about sea level and within the tidal range. So they are threatened by sea level rise. Of course, if sea level rises, for mangroves and marshes to survive, they either have to keep up with sea level by accumulating soil and rising with the sea, or else they need to go upland. But the issue with this second possibility is that typically you will have infrastructure behind those mangroves. Remember that 40% of global population live along the coast. So there's a good chance that there's infrastructure, which means the mangroves and salt marshes are squeezed. And they just cannot keep up with sea level rise. They'll just die. Mangrove ecosystems are very well known for their contribution to the carbon cycle. We estimate that about we find 1,000 tons of carbon per hectare in mangrove forest. Most of that carbon is captured in the soils. We've been around the globe making measurements of above ground biomass, which is I was going to say easier to do than below ground, but maybe it is not the case for mangrove forests. It is very hard to go and estimate above ground biomass in the field. It is really, really hard. We also made measurements of soil carbon. So by inserting these large PVC pipes, extracting the cores and looking at the accumulation of sediments, but also the amount of carbon that is contained in the soil. So mangrove ecosystems, like I mentioned, are known for their large storage of mangroves, but also accumulation. So here's a plot of one example of these measurements that show that mangroves have a lot more carbon than any other types of forest, including tropical forest. So here is the carbon burial rate. So that's the amount of sequestration. That's the rate. So earlier, the previous plot was about the stocks. This one is the rate. So even the rates are much larger. Notice the logarithmic scale here. So if you don't take a logarithmic scale, but instead get a linear scale, this is what you get. So they are very efficient at capturing carbon. So mangrove ecosystems provide, and salt marshes provide, lots of ecosystem services. That doesn't only include carbon sequestration, but also providing habitat for different species, including mammals, fish, and crustaceans. They also act as barrier against the dangers from being by the sea. So the impact of climate change, for example, the increase in hurricane frequency and strength, as well as tsunamis. So they protect us against all these potential effects. So when you lose these ecosystems, you don't only lose those ecosystems, you lose their services. You lose the livelihood of millions of people around the globe that live from these resources and their ecosystem. So it's not only the trees you're losing, it's everything it provides you. So once you've lost those mangroves or salt marshes, what do you have? What can you do? Well, the first line of defense is to build a wall. So here is a couple of walls that I have visited. So this is the New Orleans flood wall in Louisiana that was constructed after hurricanes, and they're quite expensive and they may not last forever. Here's another one in Guyana, South America. So this is just in front of Georgetown. So there were most likely lots of mangroves here in the past, but they're gone. Now the city lies about a meter below the mean sea level. So it is protected by this tiny wall here. So these are just two examples. There's plenty of these walls that have been constructed around the globe. So this is adaptation number one, build a wall. Number two, what can you do? Well, manage retreat, which means you buy, well, for example, in this case here, even in the US, the government buys the land from the people and they just move them inland to protect them. So talking of Louisiana, so this is the watershed from the Mississippi River Delta. The Mississippi River drains about 41% of conterminous United States. So this is the conterminous United States is what you're seeing here. So it drains 41% of the US. Everything you see here is brings sediment that is channeled all the way through the mouth of the Mississippi here in southern Louisiana. That's a lot of water, and it also is a lot of sediment. That water brings in sediment. But at some point here, the Mississippi River is channeled. It's been levied, and the entire river is thrown into the Gulf of Mexico along with its sediment. So the issue here is that the sediments are not deposited anymore within the wetlands of southern Louisiana. So here is a little animation of the loss and gain of land in southern Louisiana since 1988 using a Landsat time series. So we've estimated the land loss to be approximately 56 kilometers square lost per year. That's a lot. You will notice here on the top left, so on the east, this is the Atchafalaya Basin. The Atchafalaya is a deviation from the Mississippi River, and it takes about 30% of the Mississippi River water and brings it into this area here. So, and all the sediments are dumped here in this area, and you can see building of land in this particular area. But in most of the Louisiana coast, you will see loss because there's simply no sediment being delivered to this area. So this 56 kilometers square per year is equivalent to about a football field worth of land lost every hour. I'm not talking about years here, it's every hour. There are two processes by which these wetlands can keep up with sea level rise. The first one is the deposition of mineral sediments, which you're seeing here. So if the water slows down sufficiently, it deposits the sediments and you accumulate soil. The second process is through plant production. So see these plants at some point when there's the water is sufficiently shallow, plants can grow. They take carbon, they take CO2 from the atmosphere and inject it into the ground, and there's decomposition, which help accumulate soil. So we have mineral deposition and organic deposition. So some of those, most of those mangroves and salt marshes are found in deltas. Just for just a little bit of explanation here of what a river delta is. So you have some example here. It's a little cartoon showing rivers that are being formed at the foot of some mountain, and then there may be some lakes in between. And as the river flows toward the sea, the water that once the river water hits the sea, it slows down. And if it slows down sufficiently and it is shallow, you will have deposition of mineral sediments, which will create those deltas. So basically, those deltas are created by the slowing down of the river water to a sufficiently slow speed that mineral sediments get deposited, and you have these fans of land being created. Okay, so here's an example. I showed you earlier the Atchafalaya Delta, the Atchafalaya Basin. So here is the Atchafalaya River and the Wax Lake outlet, which is was a man-made channel. And at the mouth of these two rivers, you have sufficiently slow speeds for soil to be accumulated and islands to be created. So these two deltas here, they're small deltas, are actually increasing in land. They're building land. So here's another example to make it even clearer. So this is a hydrodynamic model. And here we're just throwing sediment, so a virtual sediment in that river. And you can see the grains going in and out of the system as the tide comes in and out. Remember, we're at the mouth of a river as it meets the ocean. It's like an eternal dance. So you have the river meeting with the ocean, and the ocean having the tide going in and out of the system once or twice a day. Okay, so the Delta X mission. With satellites, it is very hard to capture that dance between the river and the ocean. The tide comes in and out of the system once or twice a day, as I said. So the satellites would have to be either covering very rapidly and rotating around the Earth, which is not feasible. You could have also a swarm of satellites, maybe, to observe these systems on hourly scales, which is currently not feasible. and you could have a geostationary satellite, but then you only watch a few deltas, right? Only with airborne instruments can you capture these very fast processes, because with an aircraft, it's on demand. We can cover these areas within a few tens of minutes. So Delta X was designed to determine which part of the Mississippi River Delta will survive and continue to grow, and which parts of the Delta will be lost. And Delta X is designed to look at those two processes which I mentioned, one being the deposition of sediment, and the second one, the plant growth. So we flew 3 aircraft simultaneously or near simultaneously. Everest NG, which is the imaging spectrometer with 425 bands separated by 5 nanometers. So it's a full spectrum for every pixel, about 5 or to 6 meter pixels. UAVSAR is a radar, just like AirSWAT, another radar. The UAVSAR uses L-band, which is about 24 centimeters. So it sees through vegetation. And with UAVSAR, by repeating the same measurement over and over every 20 minutes, we can measure water level change within the marshes. So for this observation to work, we need to have grass. It doesn't measure water level within open surface areas. Instead, for those open water surface areas, we use AirSWAT. And AirSWAT enables measurement, just like the SWAT satellite that I'll talk about a bit later, it can do. So we measure water surface elevation in the channels with AirSWAT and within the wetlands with UAVSAR. So here's, I hope you guys have good internet. I have a bunch of animations, so hopefully you can see them properly. So UAVs, this is the King Air B200 that flies Everest. So under each of these aircrafts on the belly, we mounted instruments to observe these different processes, vegetation and hydrodynamics. We fly in these strange patterns and we keep repeating the same lines over and over, because every 20 minutes, we want to see what changed on the landscape. So as the tide goes in and out of the system, we want to observe it. And at the same time, we have people not on the ground, but in the boats, as well as on the ground in this case. So we're measuring the currents in the rivers. We're measuring water surface elevation using these gauges here. Those are pressure transducers that measure water level with a couple millimeters of accuracy. So it's very accurate. So there's a lot going on here, and this is what Delta X is about. So the campaign occurred in the spring and fall 2021. Okay. We flew those 3 aircrafts. Here is just a summary. So UAVSAR and AirSWAT are radar systems, and they measure the hydrology of the system. So the water level change with the tide going in and out of the system. And Everest NG, which sees spectra for not only vegetation structures, so the different plant species have different colors, we can map that, but we can also see with Everest NG water color from which we get the concentration of sediments. So if we know where water is going with the radar, and we know what's in it because of the imaging spectrometer, we can determine the transport of sediments across the landscape. So each of these instruments correspond to an upcoming or current spaceborne mission. So UAVSAR is an L-band radar, just like NISAR, which will be launched in January of 2024. So in a few months already. Then we have AirSWAT, which can be used to simulate and also calibrate the surface water and ocean topography mission. So SWAT was launched on December 16th last year, and data will be available freely to all in October of this year. And it covers the entire globe. Everest NG can be used to simulate SBG, so surface biology and geology mission, which I'm not sure what the date is, but it's probably in the 2030s. Otherwise, there are other missions that can be used, such as Sentinel-2 or Landsat which don't have the number of bands that ABRIS has, but at least you can see some colors. So here's an example of the flight patterns of these three aircrafts. So these are simultaneous on April 1st, 2021, and you have UAVSAR following the same pattern over and over. You have AirSWAT doing this, something similar, a different pattern, but that's being repeated over and over. And ABRIS-NG, which in this case here is mapping vegetation structure. That's why you see this very wide coverage from ABRIS-NG. And of course, here I put the altitudes of these aircrafts, because although they are near simultaneous, they are definitely not at the same altitude. So they're not going to hit each other. During those flights, we were in the field measuring vegetation structure and also looking at soil accumulation. Here, we're actually making popsicles. So we're freezing, because these are marshes. So if you try to get a core out, it's going to decompose as soon as you take it out. There's so much water, it's just not going to stay in place. So what we do, we freeze them before taking them out. So that's why you see that smoke here. And here's one of those frozen popsicles. And we're looking at soil accumulation every 6 months. So we've been measuring it since 2019. So these are different measurements over water. So we look at water quality. So the amount of sediments in the water, water's concentrations of sediment. We're looking at the flows, the grain size distribution, and also water level is recorded every 15 minutes. So here is one of the patterns, or actually the three patterns flown by UAVSAR. So UAVSAR went like this. It flies for approximately 5 hours and repeats those images, those two boxes, every 20 minutes for 5 hours. And it did that for these three different regions. So remember, the Atchafalaya Basin here is building land. This basin is losing land. So we're looking at two different places with two different resilience, let's say. So with UAVSAR, we measured changes in water level. So here is an example. The colors indicate how much water level has changed between two passes, so 20 minutes. So you can see there's the migration of the tide through the system. And we can do this because we flew for 5 hours. We have several of those observations. So we can look at the tide going in and out of the system. It's very cool. And what do we do with this? Well, the whole point, we cannot predict the future just with these observations, right? We actually use those observations to calibrate hydrodynamic models, sediment transport models, and vegetation productivity models. So we use that data to calibrate our models. And here's how we do this. So on the right is a hydrodynamic model surface output. On the left is the UAVSAR observation for the same time frame. Oops. Yep, it's not playing. Okay, it's not playing. Anyway, so we compare UAVSAR with the hydrodynamic models, and they have to look the same. Clearly, UAVSAR is an observation. If you want the model to be realistic, it has to look like UAVSAR. And we do this by calibrating the friction coefficients, because, you know, for example, as water hits vegetation, it slows down. So we have to put the proper parameter. We have to have the correct friction parameter in the model, so we can adjust that, and we can also adjust bathymetry, which is really hard to measure. So all the data from Delta X is available for free for everyone on Earth. So all of you guys can access that data here. If you just Google Delta X data, or if you want to add ORNL to it, so ORNL DAC is the Oak Ridge Research National Laboratory. All the data, including in situ data, is there. Everything ready to use for science. And I truly hope that some of you can publish with that data. So here's some example here, water level change. So you can download the data directly. You may have to register here, but that's free and nearly instantaneous. So you can just click and download the data, and you have a user guide. We also provide workshops, so you can find the tutorials online. We also provide software which you can use to analyze and process the data. And you can also use one of the hydrodynamic models that we have, which is there online. So you can find all of that, including video tutorials at ORNL DAC. Okay, now this is airborne. Delta X is airborne, but can we do that in space? Because there are many deltas around the world, and that could benefit from this type of observations. Can we do that in space? Not exactly. As I said, only with airborne data can you capture these very, very fast processes. But the advantage of having observations in space is that it's longer term, and it also the coverage is much better. So as I mentioned earlier, each of these aircrafts has a spaceborne counterpart. For now, we have SWOT in space, and we also have some optical sensors, Sentinel-2, Landsat, EcoStress, EMIT, that can be used. So SWOT was launched in December 2022. And it's covering the entire globe, making measurements of water surface elevation in the ocean, but also in rivers, lakes, reservoirs globally. The spatial resolution of the products, we expect it to be 100 meters, but I think we'll do much better down to at least 50 meters. So any river that is larger than 50 meters will be measured. So if you have water surface elevation along a river channel, you can actually get slope. The slope of the water surface is what you can use to determine the discharge of rivers globally. So this is a very powerful type of measurement. In 2024, January 2024, we'll have NISAR. So NISAR is a collaboration between the United States and India. So India's space agency called ISRO. So it's basically NASA ISRO synthetic aperture radar. And this system will make measurements every 12 days of, it will make interferometric measurements every 12 days. So its orbit repeats every 12 days. It will revisit each area at least every 6 days because of the ascending and descending passes. But these interferometric measurements, which are made every 12 days, will enable us to make water level change measurements in wetlands globally. Just like we did with UAVSAR, except every 12 days. So we're not really capturing tidal processes, but if your time series is long enough, you can try to use harmonics, for example, to try to determine the tides. We also have another sensor currently in space since 2018. This is a JEDI, so a laser altimeter, which can be used to look at vegetation structure. So this is quite an important measurement that is currently being used to map canopy height globally, and it continues to take such data. So this data can also be used in wetlands, in particular in forested wetlands, to determine the structure of either mangroves or willows or different trees, cypress that can grow in the wetlands. Here is an example of what can be measured from a spaceborne L-band radar, just like UAVSAR or NISAR, but this is from ALOS Pulsar 1, a Japanese satellite. Currently, ALOS Pulsar 2 is in space that can enable this measurement every 14 days. So we can see here the colors indicate changes in water level, showing overflow of this river here. I don't think I see my cursor. Here we go. This is the intracoastal waterway. This is within the Atchafalaya Basin again. And you can see that there's overflow of the water toward the wetlands. So that water that's coming down into the wetlands actually delivers sediment, which gets deposited into these wetlands. So that's a very important observation here. And because it's spaceborne, we can make these nice calendars. So in this case, it's a 46-day repeat with ALOS 1, Pulsar 1, which it doesn't work anymore, but we do have the data is on the web. So you can determine water level change seasonally, which is of great interest. So if you have you can ask me questions if there's some time remaining. Otherwise, please visit those different websites. And please use the data if you can.
Thank you very much, Marc. We definitely do have time for questions, and you have quite a few in the chat box there. I'm going to go ahead and read them off to you. But before I do that, I just want to say I've never seen a scientist have so much fun in the field, playing in the dirt, in the mud, sliding around. You look like you had a good time doing your research.
Yes, and it's not finished. Next week, I'm going in the field again.
So one of our questions,
that's actually an advantage of studying planet Earth. You can do a field campaign to calibrate and validate your spaceborne measurements. If you did Mars, it would be more difficult, or stars. But if studying the Earth, it's a good planet to study.
Awesome. We have quite a few questions, and I just want to mention that a lot of our, as you know, we have a lot of international educators. So bear with me when we ask the questions, because the context is there, but maybe the conjugation is incorrect. But we'll work with it. So one of our questions is, how are you studying riverbanks? What kind of analysis would be interesting to do on sediments? And they go on and say, I'm referring to the sediments of the channel, but I could also take samples of soil from riverbanks. I can ask it again if it's a bit long.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's the question there.
Sure. Let's see here. What kind of analysis would be interesting to do on sediments?
Okay, so what's happening is the sediments are transported within the channels, and you want to know how much of those sediment that are transported within the channel make it to the wetland. Okay, so you can think of it as there's the water flows under a channel, and then at some point there's a levee. The water can overflow into the wetland and deposit sediments. But you will notice that as you go in, the water gets potentially cleaner as the sediments is either captured and deposited on the levee, and it goes inside the wetlands, and there's no more sediment. So you're not feeding sediments within the wetland. Potentially, you can have different processes. So if you have some waves in the wetlands, maybe there's resuspension of the sediment, and that concentration may increase in that case, but for a different reason. So it's not the sediment coming in from the river, but instead it's just resuspended sediment because of the waves eroding the bottom of the wetland. So there are different processes here at play. So if you have the opportunity to make measurements of sediment in these different areas, I would suggest to do transects starting from the river channel itself and over the bank or the levee and into the wetland as you go. So to understand really how the channel contributes to the sediment deposition within the wetlands. So that's what that's what we did, and that's what I would do.
Another question we have for you is, are you seeing any drastic changes in salinity levels of the water where the mangroves live and thrive?
Yes, so typically you will have much taller mangroves if salinity is lower. Mangroves can survive in fresh water. They don't need salt. They just can tolerate it, unlike other species. But the least saline it is, the taller it will be. So in those different mangrove areas that we've been visiting, including the mangroves in the Pacific, the Colombian Pacific, and say in Gabon, you can certainly see gradients going from say 30 ppt all from the ocean all the way into 0. So you see those gradients, and those gradients vary seasonally, of course, because precipitation varies seasonally. So as the river discharge increases, the salinity gradient will move toward the sea. The fresh water pushes the salt water out to the sea. So there's not much salt water that may come in. I'm not sure if I answered the question here, but yes, the salinity gradients are quite important. It's a driver of canopy structure.
We're assuming that do mangroves have a difficult time adapting to large-scale salinity changes?
Yeah, that's a good point. So of course, if you think, so say you have a 40-meter tall mangrove that's this tall because salinity may be low, say 10 ppt. And in the future, as sea level rises, more salt water will intrude inland, and that very tall tree may not survive this amount of salinity. So you may have die-off, and maybe some other mangroves will pick up, but will not be as tall. So I think the relationship between salinity and structure is important to understand. And once that is understood, you can predict the impact of climate change on mangrove structure in the future. But that's a really important question, which I have not addressed yet. And if you can, please do.
And then you can go play in the mud with Dr. Simard. We have another question for you. Because of very high sequestration rates, have you been associated with any mangrove projects that have cashed on this aspect and secured carbon credit?
I have not. So my interest is particularly global. Projects typically are on the scale of hectares. I'm not sure, I don't remember what the price is here right now, but it was used to be something like $50 a ton or so. So no, I have not. So, and the data sets that we generate, which are global. So I showed the global map of canopy height and biomass, and that's at a 30-meter spacing. So each pixel is 30 meters. We just made a new map with a 12-meter spacing using a different sensor called Tandem X. We're going to publish it hopefully soon. I wanted to publish it 2 years ago, but it's just too much work. And so the resolutions are not really sufficient for the project scale. The 12-meter is starting to be more interesting, but it's a one-shot, it's a baseline. So those carbon credits are for changes, not for stocks. And but you could use that type of data to select where a project should be installed or not. So that's what I would suggest, is to use those data sets to improve and make your campaigns more efficient. So once you've selected your the best location for such a project, you can go there. Well, you know what it kind of looks like from the global map. You go there and maybe have use drones or small LiDAR to do your project or make in situ measurements. So I will use what we generate as to support the campaign logistics.
Thank you. We have just a couple of questions. You used the term blue carbon earlier. What is blue carbon?
So there's no such thing as blue carbon, but it is a term that's been used in the literatures, in particular for policies, in the policy literature. It is just a term that groups these three different ecosystems: mangrove forest, salt marshes, and seagrasses. So blue carbon just refers to woody and herbaceous plants that thrive in the land-ocean sea continuum. And they called it blue just because it's related to ocean.
See, just two more questions. One, in your studies, do you plan or have you monitored the Nile River?
No, I want to. It's quite an important river for the region. And SWOT is currently making measurements of water surface elevation along the Nile River, just like any other river around the globe. So those data will be available in October of this year. And SWOT makes these measurements, they're repeated every 21 days. But if you account for the ascending and descending, it's at least 2 to 4 times every 21 days. So you have 2 to 4 measurements every 21 days. So it's almost like a weekly measurement. It may not be regular, but you will have the opportunity to use those data sets to monitor the Nile River, and hopefully can be used for science and understanding the processes there, but it will also be very informative in the policy realm because it crosses several countries and different communities. So it's going to be a very interesting data set to understand how water is, where's water going and how it's distributed. And available to all, so it's all free data.
We have a lot of people that really enjoyed your presentation. They love the animations, the images, and your sense of humor about the popsicles and the calendars and interferometer. I can't use a term. That was pretty funny. Our last question. Well, first off, people want to know if the images are free, and we did mention that a lot of the images you did mention. In fact, you have them there on the websites there, so they can grab them there. We have as part of our program, we have called the GLOBE program. We have students around the world, 127 different countries, going out and make environmental measurements. And some of the measurements they make are with water quality. So they measure alkalinity, pH, nitrates, turbidity, things like that. One of our audience is asking, what can students do to help measure mangroves in their area? We have students in Colombia and Thailand that made similar measurements. They went to measure a mangrove forest in their areas. What can they do to help, or what type of measurements can they do, or what type of things that they can do to make measurements similar to what you're doing in your area?
Yeah. So what drives canopy structure is you have the salinity, which we talked about, but also nutrient availability, which you just mentioned. Some students or people are measuring around the globe. So modeling the relationship between the resources. So say the resources would be the phosphorus and the nitrate, and the limitation would be salinity. So what is the relationship between these resources and these stressors, salinity, with forest structure? So these models will also be very helpful to understand if you have any change in your local river, if you have, like, say, a water diversion project, you're building a dam or levee, or there's some agricultural land that's being developed on the side of the river, which may provide more nutrient, it might all change the entire balance of your system. And if you understood prior to that change what the relationships are, you can predict what the impact will be in the future of whether you're dumping nutrients from shrimp farms or agricultural banana plantations into the river. What impact will it have on the mangrove structure? It doesn't have to be a negative impact, but it's interesting that once you find these relationships, you can use those relationships to predict the future. Whether it's human, the future is due to a human impact or climate change impact. So that would help tremendously if you had these types of measurements.
Thank you. We do have like these student symposiums that students from elementary up into high school will do this research, and then they will create poster presentations or presentations much like you do. And it's great for them to be able to understand what's going on in their local regions, but also apply that to a larger scale. Yeah, so once again, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for presenting to us. There's been a lot of great questions and a lot of people that really enjoyed your presentation. So once again, thank you. It was a great presentation.
Thank you.
So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian Campbell. So go ahead, Brian, go ahead and take over.
All right, thank you, Peter. Yeah, and thank you, Dr. Simard, for the presentation. What a great presentation, and lots of things in there. I've been at NASA 23 years, and there's lots of things that I learned from you that I did not know about. So I'm super excited about that, to look more into Delta X and all the research you've been doing with your colleagues. So, and I noticed in your one image that you and Lola Fatoyimbo are all work together. So I saw that, and she's been a great great person for our campaign as well, as she spoke several times at some of our challenges, doing Instagram reels and presenting at our webinars. So that's great to see that tie in. So I'm going to right now hop back to my slides, and we're gonna talk a little bit about the challenge that I mentioned earlier, and then I will pass it over to our own Peder Nelson in a second. So right now, it's going on starting the 1st of May, running through the entire month of May. You may know about it, you may not, but hopefully you do. It's Where's the Water? A Globe Observer Data Challenge. And it's a challenge where we want you to help us document water in the landscape and map mosquito habitats. So it's a combination of land cover and mosquito habitats. But we like you to do some trees as well. But we're really focusing this challenge on land cover tool and mosquito habitat mapper. That's part of the Globe Observer app. And then there's a couple things here, but I'm going to show this brief video quickly, and then I'll pass it over to Peter to expand upon this and go into his riparian 2. And I know you're interested in trees with wet feet. Okay, so I'm going to share this, and Kristen Weaver is actually on the webinar now, and she created this awesome video for the challenge as promo. So I'm going to play this, and then I'm going to stop sharing it after I introduce Peter, and then he'll take it from there.
Water is dynamic. Shorelines shift and rivers twist. Plants cover water edges, changing the shape and character of water bodies. Water accumulates during rain and evaporates during drought. From vast oceans to a few drops in a bucket, some bodies of water persist for many years, while others last just long enough for mosquito larvae to grow into adults. For scientists studying Earth's water from space, the boundary between land and water is not always easy to map, and small areas of water may not be visible at all. Help us provide context and a point of reference for scientists by documenting water in the landscape and mapping mosquito habitats found there with Where is the Water? A Globe Observer Data Challenge from May 1st to 31st, 2023. Learn more at observer.globe.gov/water-challenge-2023. Water.
So that was really cool promo for the Where's the Water challenge. And right now, just about every one of you knows Peter by now, Peder Nelson, and he's going to talk to you riparian 2, global surface water, mangrove science, and trees with wet feet. And he, as you know, is the land cover science lead for the Globe Observer and one of the, of course, co-leads for this challenge. So, Peter, let me pass it over to you.
Thanks, Brian. I really appreciate the opportunity to follow such a great presentation that really leads into why we're doing what we're doing. And some of those photos that I think Dr. Simard highlighted is why you can't do a tree height measurement when you're in mangroves or in some of these areas that are wetland, or there's just certain locations where there's trees, but we can't actually walk in a straight line in the way that Brian has tried to encourage us to all do, right? So to me, that's one of these opportunities where if you can't walk to a tree because of the root structure or some of the dynamics in the forest structure of that place, our land cover photos are really, really useful in that way. And Dr. Simard really highlighted how just having that photo and kind of what the water looks like, the color of it, the level of it can actually be recorded in these. And so this rapid assessment of just documenting with the Globe Observer land cover tool where water is located is really valuable. And Dr. Simard really highlighted the upcoming science missions that we'll be able to take advantage of, that will move from just the Mississippi Basin, where we have the imagery that we had to acquire using airplanes or aerial vehicles like that, rather than satellites. Satellites are powerful because they give us that global coverage. And so I want to encourage everybody to start, don't wait for that data to come down in October. In fact, as was mentioned there, it's already collecting data. This surface water ocean topography mission is one that it's already collecting data up in space. And so we should be doing the same thing. And that will give us all some really interesting data next fall to start working when this vast amount of data, radar data, is going to be coming down and helping us to understand where that water level really is. And so I really am excited to see what has already transpired. We have over 1,000 photos that have come in from our data challenge already. We can kind of see this really interesting pattern where it looks like over the weekends or there's some particular days where we're actually getting quite a bit of participation here. Right. So I hope that you might have contributed to this since you're in our campaign. But if you don't see a dot on this map where you are, take this challenge that we're really pushing forward to document where the water is. Again, I think it's really important to think about much of our satellite perspective or our measurements from above actually get impeded by the tree canopy and what's actually over the water. Sometimes, as Dr. Simard mentioned, it is just vegetation, which could be trees or it could be grasses or shrub types. So what is happening at that edge is a really important piece. So I'm really happy that we're starting to see some of this representation come in during this month of May. And importantly, we can actually start to go over, and I wanted to highlight, this is over the last 5 years, the data that the Globe community has taken photos of on the ground. And you can see, I wanted to zoom in on this Gulf Coast area in the United States where the Delta X mission was really kind of focused right here in this area. And one thing that I'll highlight as we start going through and maybe looking at these is, I just picked one location, and I'm going to go ahead a little bit here to look at one of my one of the observations that came in, and let me get to it. Is this one, because this is sort of a demonstration of the wetland areas and what you might end up being able to see. Again, a lot of times when we're talking about water, we're not able to go out there. We don't have a boat or some other reasons. In this case, there's actually nesting birds. So we don't want to go out into this area necessarily and paddle around and make our measurements there. We want to try to minimize our research impacts on species like that. But luckily, I'm able to stand on the shoreline and do that assessment and actually see here. If we can zoom in, we can start to actually see some of the vegetation along the coastline, right at that moment. One of the other things that I'll highlight that is really important for scientists is how rough is this water, right? Is there a lot of waves on the top of it that could reflect the light in a certain way that might give our satellite measurements some challenges, some problems, right? And then one of the things too that's really important is that with one photo, we can sort of see where that water level is in relation to some objects, and we can get a relative height by going back and doing repeat measurements in the same place, because we can see, is the water in the same level? Is it actually at the same grass height here? Or when we go back to make the measurement, has it changed in height somehow? So we can actually use the trees along the shoreline and some of that vegetation that we can see as a way of helping us to understand that water volume as well, right? So we can actually get quite a bit of really interesting information out of some of these photos like this. And I want to highlight that, no, we're not out here making measurements of the amount of the vegetation that's out here or the algae or some of these kinds of things. But because of the colors, the patterns, the shape, the location of them, this is something that students could actually use, to describe their location. And again, we start to look at maybe the bases of our trees to see how do they have indications of a root structure that shows that they have their feet in the water at least some of the time. Water is a really fascinating thing, and I'm kind of focusing on this one because the time that this observation was made is really important. There are certain places, like Dr. Simard really highlighted there, that have this tidal influence as well. So water can change on an hourly basis, a daily basis, a monthly basis, yearly basis, decadal changes, time spans. So even though, I get this question a lot, what is the value of these photos that we're collecting? And it really goes back to the type of questions that we're trying to answer. And if we do a good job of repeating our photos, we can not only get a baseline, but we can also start to monitor those changes and how that water might be impacting the canopy or the vegetation growth, which might lead us to actually go in and maybe use some of our globe protocols like water transparency, right? For me, this is one of these that down photo, if you could combine it together with a Secchi disc or something like that actually goes underneath the water, that right there can give us a sense for how much sediment is actually in that water. Is there sediment moving through that system, or is it pretty clear? Meaning that there's not as much sediment moving down there, or there might be some other things that are going on. So I want to encourage those leaders here and the students here to start thinking about how you might be able to combine together a rapid assessment of photos, remote sensing like this, but together with those ground measurements that Globe has been providing and allows you to get a little bit more detailed, just like Dr. Simard was doing, right? He's not just relying on the satellite measurements or the remote sensing to understand what's happening. He's actually bringing in the Globe type of protocols to measure things like nitrates or the salinity of that water. And as he highlighted, there are certain plants and trees that really, really like that type of environment. So I want to go here and see if I can maybe find one of the other photos that I saw come in here. Yes, this is a great one, because I wanted to highlight, that canopy structure around the water is really important too. Okay, so our up photos with our land cover tool gives us that rapid assessment of that canopy structure that Dr. Simard was talking about, right? So we can look up and we can see how much leaf is above us. Do we see sky? And with this, we can actually see our green up or leaf out of the trees. And again, that's tied to a date in a specific place. And one thing that came out to me when I was in this area, in the southern Delta area, is our down photos, right? So again, our land cover photos through the Globe Observer give us a lot of information. Contextual in their northeast southwest direction. Our up allows us to see what the satellite might be seeing. Is it a tree canopy? Or, like Dr. Simard mentioned, is it open water that we might need to use a different sensor to actually understand? Here, we're able to see what the root structure is, and also hear a little bit of the vegetation, and even sometimes the type of leaf that this tree has. Just looking at the base, we can actually see here a little bit of the type of tree that is there, right? So again, these are nice rapid assessment tools that give us a sense for what's in that location. One thing that was highlighted to me in this tree, unfortunately, doesn't really demonstrate it well, but you can actually start to understand how deep the water is with some of these mangroves by looking at things like the root structure. Okay. And what I mean by that is there are certain trees that will actually have roots that go up above the water level so that they can keep breathing. And so cypress trees and a variety of these trees that are along these coastal areas or along these areas with water, surface water interacting with them, they can't handle saturated soil that doesn't have air in it. Right. And so if they're always underwater, how do they do the photosynthesis in the way that plants on the land do? So if you actually start paying attention to not only the tree canopy and how tall those trees are, but look around the base and the roots of those trees, you'll start to understand a little bit more about why things are the way that they are. And again, you might then be pointed to particular Globe protocols, which will help you understand the soil and some of those nutrients and the limitations that Dr. Simard was hitting on and highlighting earlier. So I'm going to take us back to something that I really really enjoyed seeing when Dr. Simard actually shared one of those very first maps of canopy height that he was able to do, focus on these mangroves areas. And I want to highlight, when I first look at this map and turn on our canopy height, I don't see anything, right? Because these areas are so small, relatively speaking, compared to the globe. And so you really have to start zooming in on these maps to start understanding and seeing what was mapped out. And so this is an opportunity for you to start looking at that canopy height, hopefully tree canopy, but it could be other vegetation around some of these areas that Dr. Simard was highlighting. And so you can see there's some nice statistics here. There's some nice patterns that, again, you might be able to use to say, I want to go out to this blue area or turquoise area, and why does it look that way compared to an area that's more yellow, right? These maps are really the first place that then can start a full investigation. And so I really want to highlight this one because this canopy height is really useful the biomass is another thing that's really useful, but much more intensive to create. But you can start exploring some of these delta areas around and starting to see some of the data that Dr. Simard and colleagues have created. And if we zoom in on, say, the question was about the Nile River here, we can actually see that there isn't any data here from what Dr. Simard has created, right? So understanding these limitations, to me, this is that wide open research, right? What is in this area? So I could keep going and exploring all kinds of different areas, but I want you guys to recognize that there are scientists who are creating data that we can use to understand our local environment. And that is the beginning of a lot of our investigations, is seeing what has been out there to describe our situations and our locations, and then using the tools that we have in the GLOBE program to understand, to test, to verify that that actually is what is in our area. So with that, Brian, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Thank you, Peter. That was such a great tie-in and overlap with Dr. Simard's presentation and what we are all envisioning with the What is a Water challenge, and what you can do with that data, and that that science data is out there, whether it be on the GLOBE program or with the data coming from SWAT or Delta X or whatever satellite mission, airborne mission. All that data is out there, and thank you, Peter, for that that tie together at the end of everything, and thank you to Dr. Simard for the great presentation about Delta X, mangroves, river deltas, and everything, and the research you've been doing, and we wish you all the best with all the continued research. And I know the folks here, since we have representatives from 13 countries here right now. They're seriously interested in using that data, based upon the questions and their interest, and in the comment section as well. So thank you, everyone. And please stay tuned for an email that's going to come out either sometime today or maybe first thing tomorrow with the recording. It's all dependent upon Zoom and how fast I can get it up on the webinar page. And there's going to be lots of links that are going to be associated with this webinar. So that is going to be underneath the recording on the webinar page. So thank you all, and also stay tuned for the June Trees Around the Globe Student Research Campaign webinar. We will get that info to you very soon. And thank you all so much. And please reach out to us at any time if you have any questions about the campaign, your research. You want to talk about the research and any of the the data coming from NASA or anywhere else that you're interested in. So thank you all so much. And I'm going to stop the recording right now.